The hearing will come to order. Good afternoon, everyone, and we welcome our witness, Acting Director Beth Cobert. Thank you for being here today to talk about the Office of Personnel Management's budget request of $321 million for fiscal year 2017. Last time you appeared before this committee, you were on the job for approximately 3 weeks, right after OPM was in the headlines for months for a pair of data breaches that compromised the privacy and security of over 21 million people. These breaches have been described as the largest cybersecurity attack against the United States government. Now that you've been on the job for more than 8 months, I want to hear how the agency proposes to use the funds to strengthen cybersecurity and to assist the data breach victims. Specifically, last year, this committee provided OPM with $21 million to improve its IT infrastructure and security. Now, this year, your agency is requesting an additional $31 million for additional upgrades. We're well aware of your past attempts to modernize the federal retirement system. That's dragged on for close to 2 decades now, and that's been at the taxpayers' expense. And that was, as we understand it, hindered by a number of weak management practices. So critical to the success of any large IT project is thoughtful planning, budgeting, and collaboration at the outset. So we look forward to discussing with you how you plan to manage these critical IT projects. Now, the Inspector General has had some serious concerns about the infrastructure improvements and how you fully overhaul the agency's technical infrastructure. The IG says that in 2015, he did an audit that said you failed to complete the major business case plans for capital acquisition, failed to provide the full scope and cost of the project, and failed to explain how legacy applications that are critical to the OPM's operations will be updated and migrated into the new IT environment. The committee hopes that OPM will adhere to OMB's guidance on planning and budgeting for large IT projects, and we look forward to hearing how you've addressed the IG's concerns to reduce the risk of project failure. We expect OPM to also demonstrate measurable outcomes throughout the life cycle of this security upgrade. Early this year, the administration announced that it would establish a new government-wide service provider for background investigations called the National Background Investigation Bureau. This bureau would be housed in your agency, but it would be funded in part by funds appropriated to the Department of Defense and in part by fees charged to different agencies. Now, in the course of setting up the Bureau, you would shut down the agency's Federal Investigative Services Office that currently conducts these background investigations. Now, closing this office is a significant organizational change, and that requires OPM to submit a letter to the committee under Section 608 of the Omnibus Bill last year. And I'm disappointed that it took numerous requests on our part to provide the committee with a 1-hour briefing on the Bureau. It only occurred last week, and we have yet to receive the letter. So, as such, this subcommittee and the Defense Subcommittee, which I'm also a member of, got a lot of questions about the out-year funding for this proposal, the lines of authority between OPM and DOD and their IGs, and the potential for fee increases for background investigations, which will largely be borne by these agencies. And hope you can shed some light on these concerns today. Lastly, I'd like to discuss OPM's role in creating a first-rate workforce for the 21st century. We've been reading about the graying of the federal workforce for years, the demand for skilled workers, and the need to improve the USA Jobs online application portal. I look forward to your thoughts on how OPM will help recruit, retain, and develop a top-notch workforce that enables the federal agencies to carry out their critical missions. Likewise, your agency must act to build a cohesive senior management team for itself that communicates effectively with each other, with their IG, and with Congress. With many new senior staff joining OPM, as well as recent turnover in the high-profile positions, your agency should seize this opportunity to demonstrate to federal agencies how to recruit, how to develop, and how to strengthen an exemplary management team. So thanks again for taking the time to meet with us. I'd like to turn now to my ranking member, Mr. Serrano, for any remarks he might make.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would also like to welcome Acting Director Beth Cobert back before the subcommittee. It is good to see you, and I look forward to hearing your testimony shortly. As we all know, the Office of Personnel Management has had its fair share of issues arise over the past year, and members on both sides have expressed serious concerns. And I want to emphasize that this has been one of those issues where both parties have agreed that it happened, it was bad, and it can't happen again. Something has to be done. But I believe it should also give us more resolve to provide OPM with the resources it needs to protect the millions of federal employees from having their personal information and records compromised. Acting Director Cobert, I'm confident that you are the right person to lead the agency and help restore trust at OPM, and your appointment comes during the crucial remaining months of this administration. As the nation's largest workforce, the federal government must continue recruiting, hiring, training, and retaining the very best and brightest. We must also ensure that our federal workforce is as diverse as the American people that it serves. Our federal employees are on the front lines of providing the services that countless Americans depend on each and every day, and they must get the respect, compensation, and benefits they deserve. And we must also recognize our federal retirees and protect the benefits that they have duly earned for their many years of service. That is why OPM is such a critical agency. For 2017, OPM is requesting $321 million, which is nearly $50 million more than last year's enacted level. These investments will help OPM carry out its agency priority goals, which include enhancing the quality of background investigations, moving toward an electronic applications process for retiring employees, improving health outcomes for 8.2 million FEHB enrollees, and continuing to bolster the security of OPM's information systems. As time and technology change, the federal government should work to keep up with it. That is why I support the President's budget request for OPM, as it represents a step in the right direction in providing those necessary investments that the agency needs to improve in performance and the delivery of benefits to its employees. I urge my colleagues to join me in supporting the request as well. Although OPM continues to work to meet its challenges, chief among them is protecting the valuable information of federal employees and retirees, and continuously monitoring for possible malicious behavior. Last year, the majority refused to fully fund your efforts to comprehensively address many of the IT infrastructure challenges that you are facing. And this year, you're formally including these funding requests within your budget justification. In my opinion, we must support these efforts and stand with OPM in order to protect the personal information of federal employees. I thank you again for joining us this afternoon. I wish you the best of luck with your pending nomination and hope my colleagues in the Senate will act quickly to ensure your confirmation to lead OPM during the final few months of the President's term. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Well, thank you. Now I'd like to recognize the Acting Director. If you'd keep your statement to about 5 minutes, your full statement will be included in the record. So the floor is yours.
Thank you, Chairman Crenshaw, Ranking Member Serrano, members of the subcommittee. Thank you for the opportunity to testify before you today regarding the U.S. Office of Personnel Management's fiscal year 2017 budget request. As you know, OPM's discretionary budget consists of funds from two appropriated sources, which are used to perform OPM's fundamental roles as Human Resources Agency, Personnel Policy Manager, Earned Benefits Program Administrator for the federal government. These funds, the salary and expenses and trust fund transfers, represent 14% of OPM's total operating costs of $2.1 billion. OPM operates several programs that are funded on a fee-for-service basis. These fees are charged to other agencies based on actual costs of services provided and are managed through a revolving fund. These revolving fund programs include the Federal Investigative Services, which provides investigative products and services for federal agencies to use as the basis for suitability and security clearance determinations. This makes up the largest component of the revolving fund. Human Resources Solutions, under which OPM provides various human resource services to agencies. This makes up a smaller component of the revolving fund. And USA Jobs, the U.S. government's official web-based job board for federal jobs and employment information, which is an even smaller component of the revolving fund. OPM's FY 2017 discretionary budget request builds on the progress already made with a focus on management discipline, ensuring decisions are made based on reliable data, and delivering excellent customer service in accordance with OPM's strategic plan. OPM's budget also looks to make critical investments, including substantial additional resources for IT operations, funds for implementation of a new financial system to support administration of OPM's earned benefit trust funds, and support of OPM's retirement services. To fund these critical investments, the budget proposes an increase of $44 million in appropriated funds. OPM is responsible for operating and maintaining the IT systems used to support the recruitment, hiring, and management of federal employees and administration of their benefits. OPM is also responsible for the IT systems that support the background investigations process. OPM's FY 2017 requests includes $37 million to enable OPM to continue the ongoing enhancement of the security of OPM's current IT infrastructure and systems, while simultaneously standing up a new infrastructure called the Shell that is starting to be deployed this year. OPM will use the FY 2017 funding to support migrating the existing legacy systems to this more modern and more secure infrastructure. A dual environment of legacy systems and the Shell must be maintained during the migration period to allow time to replace or re-engineer the existing systems without affecting current services. The funds we are requesting for FY 2017 are critical to ensure OPM can continue to make progress in strengthening the cybersecurity posture of its systems and modernizing those systems. Each year, OPM receives about 100,000 new retirement claims and handles post-retirement services for 2.5 million federal annuitants, survivors, and their families. While we are making progress in our work to improve the timeliness and accuracy of the customer service experience for the 1.8 million calls and emails we receive annually, challenges remain. The FY 2017 budget includes $1.5 million to increase the number of retirement services staff that respond to these customer inquiries. In January, the administration announced a framework for strategic and structural changes to modernize and fundamentally strengthen how the federal government performs background investigations. In conjunction with this effort, OPM will stand up the National Background Investigations Bureau, or NBIB, a government-wide service provider for background investigations, which will be housed within OPM. It is important to note that OPM is not requesting additional funding for this part of the transition work, which will be supported by the revolving fund. DoD will design, build, secure, and operate the NBIB's investigative IT systems. We anticipate that the process of transitioning responsibility for the IT support of our background investigation systems to DoD will not be completed in FY 2017, and that OPM will continue to need funding to support and secure these systems in FY 2017. I want to thank the committee for its support of our FY 2016 budget request. OPM will continue to strengthen our cybersecurity and IT posture, stand up the NBIB, continue to provide quality background investigation services, support federal retirees, and implement the initiatives that make up the people and culture pillar of the President's management agenda so that OPM may lead agencies in their efforts to recruit, train, and retain a world-class workforce. Thank you for this opportunity to testify today, and I'm happy to address any questions you may have.
Thank you. Thank you very much for that. Let me ask you, you mentioned $37 million for cybersecurity this year. Last year, I think there was $21 million. Was that more just general IT upgrades? That was not so much for the cybersecurity. I remember that number was thrown around kind of informally. That's how much. But I think at the end of the day, was it the 21 million? That was more, that was not so much the new cybersecurity, that was just upgrades.
Thank you, Congressman. There's a set of funding that we are doing to upgrade our systems, including cybersecurity, and part of the 21 million is for that. Initially, that is to stand up this new infrastructure, which we're calling Shell, which is a modern environment where you can more easily and more effectively deploy the tools you need in 2016 to have for your system. So we're deploying Shell, and we'll be then, with the money from this year, continuing that deployment and starting the migration of systems and the modernization of systems into that environment. So we've got cybersecurity tools that we are still using on our systems today that make them more secure, the new environment, and the transition of the new systems into that environment.
Well, the upgrade part, is there a way to identify how much that's going to cost throughout its cycle? And is that that's a program that I guess you're upgrading. Can you tell us what progress you've made there, and maybe what's the full life cycle of that kind of project?
Congressman, as we're doing this, we're thinking about going through the applications one by one and saying, what does it take? What's the most effective path from a security perspective to move the system? What's the most effective and efficient way to do that from a financial perspective as well? So, for an example, in 2017 in our budget requests, there's roughly $10 million to migrate some of the more modern distributed systems. USA Jobs and USA Staffing will get moved to the new environment. There's also funding, a few $1 million, that's to do the planning on the more complex legacy systems, the older, more complex ones that are harder to move. We want to do that planning in 2017 so that when we make the investments to modernize those systems, we have a clear plan in place. We know what it will take and the funding. So we're doing planning for migration and actual migration in 2017.
So I remember since last year, in the middle of all the problems, the number was thrown out, well, maybe we need about $37 million to do all that. And then coincidentally, this year, $37 million is requested. So I just wonder how, and then your Inspector General kind of raises the question, where does the number come from? We don't want to we're not just spending more money like sometimes happens in government. If we spend more money, we can solve the problem. How did you arrive at this $37 million? And what, I think you talked a little bit about, you got to have a plan, and then that'll be ongoing. But just tell us briefly about how that's different than what you thought about last year. Is it more refined this year that you know where that $37 million is going to go?
Congressman, thank you for the question. And we have been working to refine this plan as we move forward and as we learn more. So the funds to operate, part of the $37 million is the standing up of the new environment and the cost to run that. That part's there. We also have continued to refine and prioritize the order in which we go after systems and the way we go after modernizing the systems so we can assure that we're getting benefits as we go. We've worked this through. We've completed the OMB 300 in the fall and reviewed that with the Inspector General, and frankly expect to continue the ongoing dialogue we have with the Inspector General and his full staff about how we're using this money. But we have a more refined plan. There had been a thought about modernizing the background investigation systems, but with the decisions that have been made about NBIB, that's going to be done through a different form. So we're now focused on the ones we can move most rapidly and effectively. That's the ones we were specifically requesting the $10 million to move those today, and to do the planning on some of the more complex systems. We want to have more planning so that we know how to do those right in the next phase.
I got you. And along those lines, in the budget request, one of the things, there's $6 million requested to help build a system, kind of coordinate between the retirement system and the Social Security. How do you arrive at a number like that? And is that, do you develop a plan, or is that something that next year you'll need some more money? That'll be an ongoing plan. Give us a little background on what goes into those kind of decisions.
Sure. The $6 million with Social Security is a somewhat unique piece. The money is intended for us to be able to coordinate OPM systems and Social Security systems to reduce the amount of improper payments for individuals with disabilities. OPM will make a determination about disability payments, so will SSA, and we need to get those done in a timely and coordinated way so we don't create improper payments and overpayments to individuals. That's the goal of the system. The system dollars here, per the way we were instructed to do this through the Bipartisan Budget Act, are funds requested by OPM, but they are actually changes in SSA's systems to work with us. So we worked in this case with SSA to develop that estimate.
And so that's an estimate that get that up and running. I mean, that ought to save money in the long run, right? Spend $6 million a day, and if you're making $48 million of inappropriate payments, if you cut back on that, get your money back, money well spent. But do you expect, is that something you set up a system one time, or do you think that's something you'll come back next year and say, well, that's either working, not working, we need some more money?
Congressman, I don't have the details on that, but I can get back to you on that. I know it is intended to do what you said, which is to put the process in place so we can both save the money and frankly not create confusion for lots of citizens out there who, when they get the notices about improper things, it's not helpful to them.
We'll have time for other questions, but let's go now to Mr. Serrano.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Director, once again, let me thank you for being here today during such a difficult time. And part of the difficulty is this statement by the IG that any action you take during the period where you're awaiting your confirmation may not be valid. That could be something that people pay attention to or not. But if people make it an issue, it could create a problem for a lot of folks. What is the administration position on this? What are they saying? What is the legal counsel saying to this?
Thank you, Congressman. The administration position, the view from the Department of Justice, who provides the guidance on this issue, is very clear. And the guidance indicates that I am acting fully within my authorities in this role. It's consistent with precedent across multiple administrations of both parties. I'm serving at the direction of the President. I'm confident in the guidance from the Department of Justice in my ability to serve, and I'm coming to work every day thinking about how I can help OPM deliver for federal agencies, for the federal workforce, for the American public.
Am I correct or are people correct in the rumors I've heard or the statements I've heard that this would become an issue only if someone were to sue over a decision you make?
I believe that is correct, but I am not the lawyer, so I again go back to the guidance from the Department of Justice that says I can do what I'm doing every day.
And I'm glad you have that guidance because I've been here 26 years and I can't name you which ones, but I do remember situations where people were serving in a position awaiting the full confirmation. It's happened before. So I don't see any problems with your desire to continue to do your work. You're asking for an increase in non-trust fund appropriated resources of $24.2 million, not including an increase for the Inspector General's office of $707,000. What will this increase allow you to do that you would otherwise not be able to accomplish?
Congressman, the increases that we're requesting in our 2017 budget are vital for us to continue the progress we make, to continue enhance the cybersecurity of our systems and the valuable data that they contain, to continue to enable us to modernize those systems, to ensure that we have the kinds of systems we need in the 21st century and in the era that we're operating in today. They'll help us make customer service improvements in areas in retirement services where we know we have challenges that we need to address. It will enable the ongoing programs we have to continue to help support the bringing talent into the federal government. So all those things, particularly the focus on cybersecurity, are vital to our continued progress, and the funding we're requesting is key to enabling us to do that.
Now, this is a question that we ask that comes up at every hearing because IT is something that changes every day. You know, every gadget we buy in a couple of months is no longer the latest gadget. So there are people out there with better equipment than we have. Is that part of the problem? People out there who maliciously try to find the better equipment? And what usually happens to information when it's breached? I mean, I want to be clear. I don't want people taking information from anyone that they shouldn't be taking, but when they do get into OPM, for instance, what would they use that information for?
Congressman, as you know, there's a considerable amount of
Of course, I'm asking you to think like a
information here.
criminal, you know?
Yeah, and so I don't want to attest to what they might use it for. I can tell you that our focus is on preserving that information, and we have made progress with the funding we've been given to increase the perimeter protection so we can detect people coming in. We have better monitoring of the information as it flows in and out of our systems. We're very proud that we are one of the first agencies to put in place the Einstein 3A capabilities that DHS has deployed. We've also changed, not just by adding tools, but by adding processes and making sure that we are working as an agency and with our interagency partners to have strong defenses, to have strong reactions when attacks come, to make sure we have all the kinds of procedures we have in place, and to put in place tools that are modern, and to continue the process of refreshing those and using those in a smart way.
Well, with the committee's permission, I would ask that you keep us informed, because this is something, like I said before, that everyone on this committee and this Congress agrees on. This is not a partisan issue. This is an issue of what is correct. One last question. The administration recently announced that it will establish a new government-wide service provider to be housed in the Department of Defense for the background investigations that are currently housed in OPM. How is that going? And at what point are we at with that?
Sure. We have announced a framework for with the goal of improving both the security and IT security around background investigations, as well as modernizing the way we conduct background investigations, building on work that's been done, for example, following the Navy Yard tragedy. So that's what the goal of standing up the NBIB within OPM is, and having DoD as its core provider of IT systems and responsible for the cybersecurity of that systems. We are in the early days. We've put in place that framework. We should be having the transition team in place. We will have it in place by the end of this month as we committed, and we'll then begin the detailed work of doing that transition as we have NBIB assume the operations of the Federal Investigative Service and move forward in a way that enables us to make progress in modernization, make progress in enhancing cybersecurity, but also minimizes the disruption to the very important operations that go on there every day.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Mr. Yoder is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Appreciate your testimony, and I want to really follow up on my colleagues' questions regarding the NBIB, and it would be helpful as we engage in determining whether it's doing its work is to sort of look at the autopsy of the OPM exposure.
Sure.
And so if you might just recap for the committee, now that the dust is cleared, and I'm sure there's been, you had a commission of 13 folks, I think, or something that went through all this. What are the main findings? How many people were impacted? What was the cost? Do we have a way to quantify the economic impact to the country? Do we have any measures around that? What are the key lessons learned? You know, what are those specific things to help ensure that doesn't happen again? So that's sort of the first question, then I have a few follow-ups.
Sure. Let me try and get at those, and Congressman, let me go forward. So there were two breaches at OPM that compromised personally identifiable information. There was the the personnel records breach, and then the background investigation breach. In total, just over $22 million combined between the two of those, most in the background investigation breach. We have concluded the notification process for all of those individuals and have provided to all of them identity theft insurance and identity restoration services. We've also created the opportunity for those individuals to apply for credit monitoring and identity monitoring services, and over 2.5 million people have indeed signed up for those services. That represents somewhat over 11% of the individuals signing up, and that compares to a private sector benchmark, if you look at similar circumstances, of somewhere in the 2 to 3% range. So we've made a very active effort to reach out to people, and we continue to remind them of the services that are available and to encourage them to apply. So we feel like we have gotten to people with those services. Those are now in place, and we're working to implement the extension of those services as was done as directed in the omnibus for a 10-year period. So we have services in place for individuals. When we look at the cost, I can talk to some elements of it, but we have not completed an overall estimate of what the cost is to the economy. There's been costs of providing those services to individuals, which was around $140 million. This year, it will continue at a somewhat lower level in the coming years, sort of closer to the $100 million range as we go forward, because you don't have the setup costs you do in the first year. We clearly have costs at OPM to strengthen the cybersecurity of our systems. That will be an ongoing cost that is a necessary cost. I could argue that we should be spending that money because of what we need to do to these systems, whether or not they had been breached. I know in agencies across the government, there's a need to improve the cybersecurity of all of our systems, and so we'll be making those investments. You also asked about lessons learned. Probably a critical question and one I ask myself every day. What have we learned from this? Let me lay out a couple of things, at least as a starting point. One, we are operating an environment that has a level of threat around cybersecurity that is just fundamentally different than what it was in the past, and we need to accept that that is the environment, and we have to find a way to adapt. As one of my colleagues from DA staff quoted, you know, the modern IT and internet world was designed for offense, not defense. And for those of us who are in the posture of defense, we've got to figure out a way to respond to that. So that's one piece. That does mean, too, that we've got to find a way to continually modernize and refresh our systems. We have to have modern tools in place. We've got to do that in a regular cycle so we're not playing catch-up. Third takeaway for me is that when we think about cybersecurity, we have to build it not just into tools that protect the system, we've got to build it into systems, and we've got to build it into the mindset of every individual, whether they're an IT leader, a human resources leader. It is everyone's responsibility. It's your responsibility to know not to click on an interesting email that seems interesting, but you don't recognize. We've got to recognize that we change the way we work sometimes. I take my OPM computer home with me. I didn't used to have to do that, you know, in other circumstances. We have to do that now. So it is everybody's responsibility to think about cybersecurity, to think about how we design our systems, to think about how we come together. And the last lesson I would take away is that an effective response demands a whole-of-government approach. And that was one of my great lessons from when I arrived at OPM this summer. We had, I think when I was here, Mr. Chairman, before this committee, as you mentioned, we had much of the federal government working in our basement. We had DOD, we had NSA, we had DHS, we had OMB, we had all sorts of people. And that group really worked together effectively to address issues, to understand what they were, to communicate, and to help us respond. And the power of that interagency response was terrific. And so we need to figure out how we can continue to leverage that. That was one of the reasons as we went to think about the NBIB, we wanted to build on that experience to create the relationship we've created with DOD on the IT side. So those are some of my lessons that I take away.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Mr. Bishop.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and welcome again, Ms. Cobert. Let me ask briefly about the replacement of the Trust Fund Federal Financial Service System. The Trust Fund Federal Financial System is a 30-year-old system used to perform financial management and accounting for the retirement health benefits and life insurance programs, which have combined assets over $975 billion. Apparently, the existing system is no longer supported by the manufacturer, can't be migrated to to OPM's infrastructure as a service platform, and it's not integrated with OPM's core financial system. Thus, you are requesting funds to move to a more modern financial management arrangement. Could you discuss the components and the features of the new financial management system that will replace the FFS, and tell us about the timeline for the transition to the new system?
Congressman, thank you. The replacement of this system is a critical need. As you mentioned, we are currently operating on a system that is no longer supported by our vendor. We need to move that to a modern system that can be supported in a secure way. So making that transition is important, and we need to find a way to do that and do that quickly. This is the first year of what will be a multi-year plan, roughly 3-year plan to get that done. We plan to, in that process, to the extent we can, leverage commercially available systems, other things that can do that well and do that efficiently, and leverage existing tools that exist across the government and in the commercial sphere that can do some of the functions. But this is a pretty unique set of requirements in terms of the nature of those systems, and that's why we need to get started on this now and make that investment over the next several years.
Thank you. One of your party goals is to process 90% of your federal retirement cases in 60 days or less. And I understand that as of March of last year, 70% of the cases were processed in 60 days or less. What specific strategies will you implement toward realization of the goal, and how are you working to streamline the process electronically?
We have a number of strategies in place to continue to meet the target of 90% within 60 days. And we are making strides in that.
Let me just interrupt to add to that question. I've had a couple of employees who have retired, and they've been working with in casework with federal employees who've retired and have been really frustrated in their efforts to get their retirement benefits started.
Congressman, I share your frustration, and we are working on this. We have a number of strategies that we're working on to make this happen. The first is to make sure that we can, as the claims come in, and we get a big swell of claims in January and February, to figure out how we can, example, staff up during those couple critical months of the year when the bulk of the retirement claims come in. This year, we expanded a program that we had started last year to bring in detailees from DFAS, the Department of Defense Financial Accounting Systems, and from the Postal Service, who are the two biggest sources of claims. So we've brought in detailees from those two agencies to help deal with this surge we get in January and February. That both enables us to get those initial payments to people faster. It also creates a great training ground. So when those individuals go back to their day jobs and are preparing retirement claims before they get sent to OPM, they're much more knowledgeable about our systems. They can help coach their peers about how to have claims arrive more error-free so that we can get through them faster. So we continue to look to educate agencies and educate retirees so we have fewer questions coming in. We also in the budget have a request, as I mentioned, for $1.5 million to help us staff up to answer inquiries. Even when we get things going, there are sometimes claims that have questions. We need to be able to reach out to individuals and get back to them. We need to answer your constituents' questions. We need staff that can answer the phone, answer email. We've added capability to enable people to make basic changes on their own. You can now change your address online. You can change your bank account online. But we still need to respond to emails and questions. So that's one of the reasons we're asking for the funding to increase staffing in 2017.
Thank you. I think my time has expired.
We'll have time for another round of questions, but now let's turn to Mr. Quigley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Thanks for your service. My colleagues have taken two of my questions, but I still would like to ask. According to OPM's latest figures, only about 34% of all federal workers at the senior executive level are women, and only about 20% are minorities. So it seems as though while we've made progress over the years, we still have a way to go. What is OPM doing to promote more diversity at senior levels throughout the federal government?
Congressman, we are continuing to work on this. We have work to do. There's a number of particular areas where we are working to improve diversity in the senior executive service. A key element of this is getting more women and minorities into the feeder pools that create senior executive services, the career development programs. And we are working with agencies to help bring diversity to their programs and make sure that they are reaching out to get those individuals in the program. We heard the other day a terrific example from the Department of Agriculture, who's made a real effort and has made significant strides on this score. We're working with employee resource groups to create programs to pull people into these trainings so that we have more people in the pool of folks that are ready. It's an issue that we are working on through the Council on Diversity and Inclusion. We're working with agencies on specific programs. We're working across agencies because we know that we have more to do.
Is there particular growth in recent years at one level or another? In other words, women versus minorities? Is one segment's doing better or one lagging behind?
They've all seen gradual increases, but we'd like to see it go up more. One of the challenges, you have to look at the pool of folks coming in because the senior executive core itself is pretty stable. So unless you make progress with the new individuals joining the SES, it's hard to move the mass. And so that's why we're so focused, for example, on this issue of career development programs and diversifying those programs, because that's the pool that folks will come from, particularly as SES retire in coming years.
But the original pool is people we hire. And I suspect if we're concerned about hiring at the minorities, is there more recruitment taking place at, for example, historically black colleges and universities?
We have those kinds of programs. We do see greater representation at more junior levels than more senior levels. So it's a matter of keeping that and growing it as we go. But the pipelines, particularly if I looked at the women one the other day, fair number at the more junior levels, but it tails off as you get more senior. So it's about keeping them in the pipeline for advancement.
Very good. Thank you. I yield back.
Thank you. Let me ask you a couple of questions. We talked earlier about how you arrive at numbers like the 21 million and the 37 million to 6 million. As I understand it, the OMB have a requirement, I think it's they call it an IT case justification or something like that. And I know I saw where the Inspector General said in one of those, I guess the shell migration, which you mentioned, that they had not submitted that so-called business case to OMB. Is that the case? Has that been, is that old news?
Mr. Chairman, we have submitted an OMB 300 this past fall as part of our budget submissions and our work with them. We revised that based upon what we had learned from the experience in the breach and how that would have changed our plans. So we have done that. We've reviewed it with our IG. We expect, in my mind, when I think about this from my private sector experience, you need to have that plan, but you also need a process to continue to update that as you learn more. And that's what we expect to do. The IT team meets with the IG on a regular basis, in fact, has a standing monthly meeting to talk about our progress and our plans overall. And we found that to be an effective way to have a dialogue with them as we go and not just wait for reports to get their input on what we could be doing better.
But it makes sense that you just don't pull numbers out of the air. You sit down, try to write a plan, then say, come to us and say this is what we need. So you're working on that, and we all understand that changes from time to time. But you agree that that would, as an old management person, that's a good way to plan.
I very much agree with you, Mr. Chairman. We need to have a plan, and then we need to review the plan. I know we also need to come back to this committee once a quarter to update you on our progress, and that's another good way of making sure that, we are being disciplined in how we deliver on our plan and adjust the plan if there are new facts. So we look forward to that part of the dialogue as well.
When we're talking about planning, I think it's been mentioned a couple of times, this National Background Investigation Bureau. I mean, at first glance, you say, well, you're doing that now, but you're going to do away with that agency and create a new agency. It's going to be housed in your agency, but funded and I guess worked on by DOD. At first glance, you say, well, who came up with that idea? Is that, I think that was administration, wasn't it?
It was the joint recommendation of the PAC and approved by the President's National Security Team.
I don't know, do you have a thought? If you looked at that, does that sound, I guess you got to say, yeah, it sounds workable. But doesn't it, I guess at first glance, people would say, well, okay, you're making these background checks, but you're going to do away with that agency. And I guess that's a pretty significant change. I don't know how you do that. You create a new one, but you don't fund it, they fund it. The question is like, well, who's ultimately in charge of that? If it's a success, who gets to say, take a bow, and if it doesn't work out, whose fault is that? I mean, a lot of unanswered questions. I know this is fast moving, but talk a little bit about how you think it's going to work, because I know we wanted to find out a little bit more, and it took a while to sit down and give us a briefing, because I guess it's all new. But again, some people would criticize this and say, well, this is just another way the government moves everything around, and somehow it's all going to be better. Tell us a little about what you think is going to happen.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Let me try and frame how we thought about this and why we do, and I believe, that this is an effective and really a good solution for us going forward. We started the process with a fundamental examination of how do we make sure that we modernize the way we do background investigations. It's a critical function. And how do we make sure that the data and the information systems that support that activity are secure? Right? We needed to deal with both of those. As we thought about what we needed to do, we wanted to create and build on the work that was in place to have an enterprise service provider that was really purpose-built for background investigations. That's what the NBIB is. And what it does is absorb the existing work of the Federal Investigative Service and supplement it with additional specialized skills it needs to carry out its mission. Privacy is a core issue. You might need some specialized procurement services that are currently provided through OPM but in a different way, and have that all in one place. What we then asked, and so we have this purpose-built entity, and its goal is to provide background investigation services for the full federal government. It's a government-wide services provider. OPM is a government-wide services provider. That mission is very akin to ours. When it came to the IT, what we looked and said is, what's the best place and what's the best way to provide IT services? DoD clearly has scale, expertise, tools on how to do IT in a secure way when it focused on a national security mission. So we wanted to leverage that capability. They also happen to be the largest customer of the NBIB. So they are now our core supplier as well as our largest customer. There's many other examples in government of relying on agencies to provide an element of services. GSA is the landlord for the entire federal government in most places because they have skills in being a landlord. The IT skills clearly we need from DoD are a different, specialized order, but we wanted to get them from there. And so we believe this does make sense. And I, as the acting director of OPM, am responsible for those operations. That's my responsibility.
Well, thank you. And I sit on Defense Subcommittee, so I guess that'll be part of our appropriations. But I think there'll be a lot of questions about transparency, about a lot of accountability, and I know it's all being worked out. But maybe you could, I think this committee would appreciate if you could give us kind of a monthly update, just since it is brand new. Tell us what's going on, how it's going, because I think this is one of those ideas that sounds great, but we want to see it kind of work out practically. And the last comment I'll make is down the road, I know DOD is going to provide some of the money to start with, and the agencies are going to, have to pay for these. And so I can see some out years where people are saying, gee, I didn't know it was going to cost this much. So a lot of unanswered questions, but appreciate what you're trying to do. Just keep us abreast. We'd appreciate that. Mr. Serrano?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. To follow up, the 37 million request for IT seems to mirror what the majority rejected last year. It will allow you to operate dual networks environments as you migrate systems from the old, less secure, to the new, more secure environment. Why is this necessary, and how is it helping to protect the employee data?
Congressman, we know that we fundamentally have to take what are many old, outdated legacy systems and put them into a new context. We've put in place tools on those systems today that have increased the cybersecurity of those systems. We've put in place tools around the perimeter of our network, but we fundamentally need to build in security by design. To do that, we need to modernize many of these systems, and for many, it is a complicated task because the systems are large and complex, and the systems are outdated. So while we're moving those, we have to keep the old system running as well. So we have to have them running side by side. The goal in getting the funding, in particular in getting no-year funding, is to allow us to make that transition as efficiently, as effectively, and as quickly as possible. The sooner we get through this transition, the sooner we will be able to turn off the old legacy systems, not have to have the funding that supports that any longer, and have the whole set of systems in a more secure environment.
I can't, again, stop telling you how important that is and how, unfortunately, this situation has brought us all together. And I say unfortunately because I wish we all got together on a lot of other things, and that we don't. But this one is one that makes a lot of people nervous. It makes me nervous, makes all of us nervous. And it's not what our federal employees should be expecting. Your CIO recently retired. Who is acting in that role now, and how far along are you in choosing her successor? What type of experience do you expect in the person to have?
Dave Vargas, who's a senior executive service member in the CIO's office, who's been involved in much of the planning, for example, on the modernization, is currently our acting CIO. We are working to fill that position on a more permanent basis. Your question about what I'm looking for and what we'll be looking for in that position, as we think about that, we're looking for a number of things. One, we need a strong and proven leader who understands both cybersecurity and modernizing IT systems. Those are very important skills. We also need an individual who is very effective at building networks and collaborating across the government. We know we will need that for our work with DoD on MBIB. We're going to continue to need that with our work with DHS on improving our cybersecurity. So someone who can do that well. I'm looking for someone who's a disciplined leader of getting things done. We know, we hope that we will have the opportunity to invest the $37 million that we've requested in our FY 2017 budget, and we want to make sure that we're spending that well. So we've got a terrific team in the CIO's office. We've recently brought on board 4 highly experienced members of the senior executive service and 4 senior leaders, SL folks as well. So we have a strong team. They've built a plan that they're working together on, and I know that they will continue to carry forward in a very thoughtful way while we are filling this position. But I also think we can bring in a terrific person that will continue to help them and build on this success.
And it is your intent to fill it as soon as possible, of course.
Absolutely.
Okay. Despite Congress establishing a phased retirement back in 2012, the vast majority of agencies still have not yet fully implemented and made this offering available to interested employees. What can you do now to further encourage agencies to actually offer phased retirement? And I'm not suggesting everybody should retire. I just want the information.
OPM has continued to work with agencies to help them put out the guidance to explain how phased retirement works. Now that we have that guidance, we serve as counselor to agencies as they're thinking about the best way for their specific agency to put this program in place. In each case, they have a different set of circumstances, a different set of constraints about what they're looking for, and so our role is to provide them agencies who may be doing things. It is in its early days, but we continue to have these discussions through the Chief Human Capital Officers Council and through other forums so we can make sure agencies are educated about the program and then can make the decisions that each agency will make about how to implement it in their particular operation.
All right. That's my last question. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Bishop.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. My final question has to do with advanced methods of authentication. As the modern information security measures have evolved, the well-known simple username plus password combination is slowly being replaced with more secure methods in various contexts. Even my Galaxy S6 smartphone and Apple iPad rather, can utilize biometric security through built-in fingerprint scanners. In addition to the biometric security methods, multi-factor authentication like short text code being sent to a pre-registered mobile device for verification is also a feasible option that would make it much harder for our sensitive systems to be infiltrated. How much time and money would it take for OPM to transition to one of these more secure methods of user authentication or an alternative method if available? And what are the obstacles to implementation? I'm sure it won't be easy or inexpensive, but the cost to our country's national security and the privacy of the individuals that are directly affected would appear to be well worth the expense to protect our computer systems from outside threats.
Congressman, using stronger authentication than username and password is absolutely a principle that we are committed to. We have achieved the goals of the cybersecurity sprint from last summer about two-factor authentication to OPM networks. Everyone needs a PIV card as form of that two-factor authentication now. That is in place. We are working on having that same kind of two-factor authentication for all the applications inside the network. So that's another piece we're working on. So I don't have...
Yes. What is that going to do for productivity in terms of your workforce, having to go through all of these additional steps in order to get access to even begin working?
Congressman, as we move to change our operating practices, we can do it in a way that makes it simpler. When you come in the morning, at least when I come in every day, I know I have to stick my my card into my computer. That is now part of the process. Again, as you modernize systems, it is easier to be able to do that in a way that becomes more timely and more part of the business flow. But I think we are living in a world where we need to think about how we practice cybersecurity hygiene every day, and it's necessary. Just like today, we all put on a seatbelt when we get in the car without thinking about it. I do remember when you didn't have to do that, and it seemed like a pain, but now it is just part of what we do. We don't even think any longer. And I think, frankly, we have to get cybersecurity practices to be built into our daily habits in that same way.
Let me ask you finally just a couple of questions about the data breach. I know contacting 21 million people, it's easy to say, well, just get in touch with those 21 million people. That's a pretty big undertaking. So I'm just curious, how many of those have we tried to reach all 21 million of those people?
Mr. Chairman, getting in touch with those people was a big undertaking. We were fortunate to partner with our colleagues at the Department of Defense in doing that. DFAS actually printed the letters and mailed the letters. So we worked very closely to get in touch with all those people. We decided to do, for the background investigation breach, to do it all by physical mail. It was more secure. It was the best way to get it done. We worked to update address records through the federal records, supplemented those with commercial addresses. I don't have the precise number, but it's well over 90% of people have gotten their letters, and I can get back to you with the number. We also put in place a verification center. So if you thought you should have received a letter and were concerned that you didn't get one, you could contact the vendor or go onto the website, and we would then go check and see, gee, you should have gotten a letter. Here's your PIN to sign up for services. So we've made an extensive effort to reach people. It was a lot of work, but I think it paid off in terms of our being able to get to people with the information they need so they are aware of the services that are being provided to them and could sign up for credit monitoring and identity monitoring if they chose to.
I mean, I'd say that's pretty successful. If 21 million people are out there somewhere through regular mail, you touched close to 90% of them. Because I was going to ask you what kind of, you get a lot of letters returned, address unknown, whatever, but it sounds like you've pursued that. Are you still, that last 10% or so, are there still efforts being made to, somewhere I guess you can't keep on forever, but what's the status when somebody isn't found? What happens, and how long do you try to reach them?
So we've, the verification center is one of the methods we put in place for that. And so we did get some return mail and do some checks on them. But as you say, Mr. Chairman, that loop can go on. One of the things we've done quite actively, particularly at the late part of the fall, was to continue, as the mailings wound down, was to reach out through the Federal Employment Network. So we had agencies, senior accountable officials who were helping us coordinate our response. And we sent out all employee emails multiple times to federal agencies saying, if you have not received a letter and you think you should have received one, here's what you should do. We worked with the federal unions to get the word out to people. We worked with the contractor associations. A significant number of people affected by the breach were cleared contractors who have security clearances. So we worked with the Association of Contractors so that we could reach people and say, if you think you should have received a letter and you didn't, here's what to do. And then we would those folks would submit their information, a current address, we'd send them back a letter that says either, yes, you have been breached, here's what to do about that, or no, you have not been breached, but here's some good things you should do to protect your identity, because we all should be out there protecting our identity.
Did they report that their identity had been stolen? I mean, do you keep track of that?
We get weekly reports now. That used to be daily. We get weekly reports from the vendors about how many individuals have contacted them for identity restoration services. And so we are monitoring that situation. We also continue to...
You got any idea, like all that suite of services you offered, you got any idea, like of the 21 billion people, what number or what percentage of people might have said, we'd like to take advantage of that offer?
It is a very small number. We can get you the information. When an individual calls and says, I think my identity has been breached, we don't ask. We can't ask, what was the source of that? We just take care of them. The vendor takes care of them. So some of those individuals could have had their identity, their information taken in another context, but we do maintain an ongoing dialogue with the FBI, with the IC and others to see if there are any broader trends in information so that we're aware of that.
Not a lot of people have reported theft, et cetera. And not a lot of people have said we'd like some of those protections. They've been offered those, but like, for instance, you can't put a number in terms of dollars, what it might have cost in the last half a year, what you expect.
Mr. Chairman, the way the services are structured, if your information was taken in the breach, you are automatically enrolled in identity restoration and identity theft insurance. You could contact us at any time. And if you're covered, those services will be put to work. To monitor your identity, you actually have to provide the vendor with your information, with your Social Security number. So you have to choose to do that. So everyone is covered. About 11% have chosen to take advantage of the monitoring services.
Do we know how much that cost?
The contract for the whole suite cost roughly around, and again, we can get you specifics.
Just.
140 million in the first year. It should be closer to 100 million in the second year. There's no setup costs in the second year. Everybody's enrolled. So it's sort of around that order of magnitude that was paid for through agency contributions to the revolving fund.
And do we know how long that is going to be offered?
It will now be offered for 10 years based upon the provisions in the omnibus. So we will find a way to extend coverage. The maximum coverage is 3 years. According to the provisions in the omnibus, we need to extend that to 10 years, and we're in the process of figuring out the best way to do that.
Does it sound like it's going down year to year? I mean, no way to know, but the first couple of...
We would expect that, but we're not sure, and we need to, again, go, as part of the process for competing the next round of services, we'd have to work that through.
Gotcha. Any other members have any questions, comments? Well, again, thank you for being here today. Thank you for the work that you do. I know it's a big job. The whole modernization, I think your agency is really one of those agencies where IT is so important. And I think in terms of what Mr. Bishop said, that I think that's an area where, as you said, when you go down and everybody's sitting in the basement, turning papers, as we get more used to using all the modern equipment, then we can do things much more efficiently. And thank you for the efforts you're making to do that, and thank you for your service.
And thank you for your support.
Is adjourned.